This podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's new Patreon community, the Global Coffee Think Tank. Check the show notes or head to patreon.com/mapperforward to find out how you can become a member today. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I am your host, Lee Safar. I'm the founder of Mapper Forward, and I am joined by Sergei Kutrovski from Mirror Coffee Roasters in Washington.
Yep. Good to be here.
And it is great to have you here as the cafe owner of Narrative Coffee, correct?
Cafe manager.
Cafe manager.
Did you just call me cafe owner of Narrative?
That was, you're obviously not the cafe owner.
Yeah.
Maxwell is the cafe owner.
Yeah.
You are the cafe manager. You are the owner of Mirror Roasters.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll get off that train right now. So today, as we're talking about the kind of cafe manager realm, the job has gotten increasingly more difficult. Mm-hmm. And I think that there are a lot of reasons for that. We spoke about how the job has changed in the last episode. In this episode, I want to talk about what are the most challenging elements of your job. And I want to use an example that comes from the new layer that social media adds to the challenging roles of a cafe manager. One of my clients is a cafe, and a customer came in and tweeted something about their menu, and they thought that one of the menu items was too expensive. So they went to Twitter, they posted a photo of it with some text rubbishing the cafe. It was extremely derogatory. And then what happened was that tweet got retweeted over 1,000 times.
Wow.
Which then caused people to come into the cafe and start to pile onto the staff inside the cafe while continuing to create kind of an uprising on Twitter. So the conversation that was rubbishing the cafe, it was rubbishing all the staff, it was rubbishing the products, was happening online and in the store. Mm-hmm. Now, as a cafe manager, I assume that that would be one of the very challenging new additions to your job.
Yep.
Go on.
Wow. For sure. I think especially when things around pricing, I have to navigate. I'm going through that right now. We just had to increase our pricing, and we do a quarterly audit to make sure that we're on point with pricing and shift that. So it is a challenge. It's when our mochas are at $8. That's not normal in our town right now. And so it is challenging to navigate that one-on-one, but then also to, have to deal with either a Yelp review or something you see on social media. For the most part, I haven't had anything as extreme as what you're saying, or sharing the story but I think one of the challenges, that's part of why I think managing is difficult, is just requires wisdom, outside of just conventional thought. Sometimes it feels man, the right thing to do is explain why and quote unquote become defensive and propose good ideas. But then at the end of the day, sometimes it's just, you need time to step away. For me as a manager, I know that I can sit down with the owners and I have that direct line of communication. I can sit down and process this for a minute and be okay, I've seen this on repeat. We've seen a price increase. There's not necessarily complaints, but I've seen the change. I want to avoid it from getting to social media and blowing up. The goal is then to be proactive and to be able to like we were talking about in one of the earlier episodes, instead of running around with a fire extinguisher, let's create some, or maybe we weren't, maybe
a buffer.
I said that somewhere else.
Maybe we did talk about it. Yeah.
But I think you've always said this on so many episodes about being a proactive leader rather than a reactive. Not to say that at some point when things literally happen on the spot and it was completely unforeseen, you have to react and you have to use your, experience, but also your ability to problem solve on the spot. I get it. And that does happen. That's hard. But as you create those systems, as you create trust within the community, proactive leadership should be a little easier, even though it never gets completely like, it doesn't become simple. Like if someone thinks that managing is just this simple, easy job where you just get to have fun with, your team and say hello to your regulars, like it isn't like that. There is those elements. But when it comes to situations like right now dealing with pricing and the increase that we're experiencing, that I'm experiencing as a manager, and making sure that we're on track financially as a company, like you have to make some changes. So before we release anything, for me, like I'm doing a menu change tomorrow, and actually using different elements of saying like, okay, like accessibility is important. I get it. Like things are expensive. But how can I make maybe a smaller version of a plate? How can I change something to still create accessible? Like we sell espresso, sometimes certain coffees at like $13 just an espresso. Some of our coffees are like $46 for an 8-ounce bag. Like I get it. That is expensive. But as you create that trust, I think it's possible. Now it is difficult. That's a given. Like it's hard. Again, I'm not in a town that every guest that walks in like knows who like Manhattan Coffee Roasters, or knows like they don't know some of these coffees. What's a geisha? Like,
yeah.
So like that's difficult. And we've had staff meetings where we have to talk to the staff, and some of the staff are like, I don't know if I'm comfortable in selling an espresso like at that price. And we have to navigate that conversation and be like, okay, where's the level of discomfort? What's the hesitation? And then also be open about the fact like, well, yeah, this geisha is not for everyone. Like the expectation is not to sell the most expensive item to every single person.
What I find really interesting about what you're saying is, and bear with me a second if you're listening. I feel like everybody's about to call me an asshole, but what you're doing there is talking to coffee professionals. And I can look back at times in my career when trying to convince people who were not coffee professionals but were baristas that you need to set, like, this is a coffee that we are going to sell for $25 a cup, and this is how you talk to people about it. And their response was, I'm not fucking selling anybody a cup of coffee for $25. And I mean, that definitely exists in our world, in specialty coffee, right? People just want to be a barista. They just want to come to work and do their job.
Yeah.
How do especially in a labor shortage environment, how do you navigate that part of it as a cafe manager today?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't had it like specifically that, but I'm thinking through situations where, you know, similar aspects came up. I think, again, I'm gonna reiterate this over and over again. It's like understanding that perspective and like, okay, what's the is it literally a concern for the community? Like, hey, this isn't fair to community to share or to sell the coffee this expensive. Like, are you personally offended by the price? Like, it's not accessible for you. It's like, where's the root of that upsetness? Like, let's look at that. Like, there's nothing we can do about the fact that we always talk about the coffee farmer deserves to be paid more. We always talk about these big ideas, these big pictures in theory, like more. But when it comes to actually executing that and saying like, hey, like, we need to sell this coffee, like, and I know I'm maybe not communicating that clearly right now.
No, you're doing that perfectly. Really, you are.
Sitting down with some of those employees and having that like raw, real conversation, like, where's the point of tension? Like, what's freaking you out about that?
I love that question.
Question. That's not easy. That's, for me as a manager, like, I always have to ask that and then be ready to be critiqued. Like, yeah, maybe I am doing something wrong. Maybe, who knows? Maybe we shouldn't be selling this coffee, but it's not the matter of what, it's like, why? Like there's also probably someone coming into cafe looking for that coffee. Like the way we provide, again, good hospitality is by finding that coffee for that person. And again, not to toot our horn here at Narrative, like our system, we do have coffees that are classic specialty, $18 a 12-ounce bag, $4 espresso, $3.75 batch. Like we have those coffees available. Like you don't have to drink a geisha. No one's forcing you. But we also, you know what I mean? But we also have the other, we also want to create accessibility for everyone. And that includes people who are looking for that. So having that conversation, I've had that conversation a lot of the times, is like, yeah, you don't want to sell a $20 coffee, but let's talk about the why.
And it's also important to bring your staff on the journey of what the business is trying to accomplish from a signaling perspective, right?
Yep.
Like if you're just employing people, McDonald's employ people that know how to use machines. Like they're just going to teach them how to make this egg become an egg that goes into an Egg McMuffin. They don't want you to crack the egg open and understand how to poach eggs or understand how to fry them or anything like that. They're employing people who can be systematic. That's not what we're doing in specialty coffee if we're running a cafe that wants to send a signal to the community and to its staff about what we stand for.
Yeah. Yeah, I think also within that, because we're hiring coffee professionals, or we're trying to foster a culture of coffee professionals, transparency is also key. And I know that can be abused. I get that for sure. But if your staff understand the financial situation, whether it's good or bad, they understand that there is like transparency within finance. Like we do a P&L breakdown with the staff, and then we do one with the management team. Like we talk about those things, like it's not hidden. So if it comes down to like, hey, you're selling this coffee and like pocketing extra like profits from that, like, well, that's not true. We just went over the P&L. Like, you know our numbers, like, so that eliminates that kind of idea, because I definitely know and remember situations where I even thought like, oh man, these cafe owners are like making bank. Yeah. Like, of course they're like taking $26 cup of coffee and they're pocketing 20. Like,
and they're barely breaking even.
Exactly. And I think when there's that transparency and that vulnerability across the whole team, whether that's the owner, myself as a manager, or even the staff being honest and bring that question up, like, I don't feel comfortable about this. Like that takes a lot of vulnerability. So there has to be vulnerability on both sides, and then have a conversation.
And I can say from all the consulting work that I've done, transparency has been transformative to teams. It's often very... it makes owners very nervous when I say to them, I think we should start showing the staff the P&L. I think we should start walking them through it. And they get very nervous about that, because the vibe is most likely that everybody thinks they're making more money than they're actually making. And now what they're saying is, we're going to trust you with this information. We're going to trust you to not leave. We're also going to trust that you're not going to tell everybody else. But we're going to trust that you understand our intention behind this.
Yep.
And an environment that is filled with a lot of, let's say, where employees feel very resentful, a lot of that ends up completely dissipating once we start being transparent with the staff and showing them the P&L. Sure. And it can be a really unifying experience where you say, look, I want you to see exactly what we're making and what we're not making. I want you to see exactly how razor thin the margins are. You may see $4 million a year coming through the doors, but we barely have $10,000 left at the end of the year. Barely.
Yeah.
And that's big.
Yeah. And then just numbers across the board, whether that's like how much of, cup of coffee is being charged, but also how much employees are getting paid on the team. Like, I would say being proactive about that in the hiring process, having a raise plan, like how are you going to compensate folks, like having a plan for that. And before they're even hired, like being able to have that conversation, be like, hey, this is our plan. This is what we want to do. And this is how we're going to accomplish that. And then when the conversation comes up, it's like, well, we started the conversation already. So it's not something that catches anyone off guard. But then at the end of the day, it's like, okay, well, we can make this happen if, again, here are the numbers.
Right.
And it's for me, like when playing the middleman in between the two is difficult. But when you have that support of an owner,
it's so much easier.
Like I got to credit Maxwell for being like just fantastic to work with. When I know that an owner is taking care of me, whether, on any like, financially or even just checking in with me, but then also has my back in the decision-making, then I can boldly approach those conversations and be like, yeah, Max has got my back.
And I want to shout out Maxwell because I don't know Maxwell personally, but I've definitely seen how generous he's been in offering content online in like the Facebook groups for the Washington Coffee Baristas community, I think it is. I'm a part of that as well. I don't know how I became a part of that, but I am. And he's very generous in the way that he helps people solve problems there. So we need more of that. We need people who are looking to help to solve problems rather than give their fucking opinions about shit that doesn't mean 100%. Anything. So shout out to Maxwell Mooney because that's a really great thing. All right, we're going to wrap up this episode and then we're going to be back to talk more about cafe managers. All righty? Peace, love and peanut butter, everybody. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks, friends. If you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Map It Forward on Patreon and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.